My name is Tom Beccaro. Please raise your hand if you've heard me speak before. Wow. Well, perhaps what I thought I'd do today is tell you a little bit about myself that you may not know, and then talk to you. Yes, I did write a book, a heavy book, but a good book, and then talk to you about the U.S. Senate race, which, you're right, Carol, I didn't contemplate really early this year when we talked about it. But first of all, if I haven't spoken to your group, please invite me. I was just in Lake San Marcos talking to their group, and the night before, I cooked dinner. Was it the night before or the night of?
It was the night of.
All right. And as some of you know, I offer my culinary services, overpriced as they are, to the Federated, and I have done 8 of them so far, and I've raised $12,000 for CFRW statewide. And we were in Lake San Marcos, and how was the meal?
It was delicious. And not only that, I don't read history books. I read his. It was wonderful, and it was fascinating, and it kept my attention. That's quite a book, if you can believe that.
Okay, wow.
Why, thank you. That's from a science teacher, by the way. So a little about myself you may not know. I am one of 8 children. I was the 6th child, and which carries special responsibilities. You heard the stories about the middle children, right? Well, we're really the forgotten children. I tell the story of how when we were kids and playing hide and seek, the older ones wouldn't tell us when hide and seek was over. Think about that. Plus, as I was talking at this table up front here, we also learned to eat very fast. I had 3 older brothers, and if I had any hope at seconds at all, we would eat fast. And my mother, who's a Sicilian woman who was a fabulous cook, I have no idea how my mother kept 8 kids in line on the budget that she did. In fact, in the 8 years, we had my first grammar school, St. Patrick's in New York, we had 6 kids in 8 classes. So we owned the school. And I have no idea how she was able to do it all, but she involved us in the cooking. So that's where that came from. And she used to make spaghetti sauce the real way. We would crush the tomatoes and the like. My father, on the other hand, started volunteering for politics in the 1950s, and here I am. 50 years later, or 60 years later, still doing it. In the late 60s, he started the Conservative Party of New York with about 10 people.
Wow.
And elected James Buckley to the U.S. Senate, the only Conservative Party member ever to be in the U.S. Senate. And my father involved me quite early on by having me on the couch there watching William F. Buckley Jr.'s firing line, if you remember that. And literally as about 11 or 12-year-old, I was reading The Economist magazine and Foreign Affairs at my father's behest. And then eventually, are you familiar with Will and Ariel Durant's Story of Civilization? Yeah. If you read that, I started reading that at 16, also at my father's behest. It's 12 volumes and 11,000 pages. It's quite the homework assignment. I bought my own set at 19 and finished it all at about 24 years old, and resolved to be a writer like Will and Ariel Durant at about 20 years old. And they write a special type of history. It isn't so much what a particular place was like at a point in time, or a biography or something like that, although they did do a lot of that. They wrote the 11,000 pages over a 60-year period. But what they do is they try and place everything in context. You'll have an historical event going on, and they would like to place it along the continuum of events so that you had a greater sense. This notion that history repeats itself is really quite new. It's only a couple hundred years old. And honestly, it is only a couple hundred years old. Before that, they literally thought there was no purpose to studying history. Today, that's the progressive left. But that was the type of writer. In fact, I write for Forbes now, and if you see my byline, it is I put politics in perspective. Also write for the Washington Times, the Daily Caller now and then, and other conservative magazines or online throughout the years, all in an effort to try and put things in perspective. Anything I write virtually, you will see I try and weave some history in. So my last article, or one of them, was on Donald Trump, and it was called Donald Trump, William Jennings Bryan, and the Unheard. And both of them rose to their current or then heights based on the fact that the establishment was not listening to a great portion of society, and they became quite popular. So, all that brings me to this book, which is really for me a lifetime achievement, The Divided Era. I started this book 7 years ago because a friend of mine asked me why there's so much fighting in politics today. And 7 years later, there's this book, and she's no longer allowed to ask me any questions. Who's got the time? Fighting in politics. Today we are quite divided. But we're not divided for the reason that most people hear about. And that's why I wanted to write this book. The media and many people blame the participants, particularly on the right. All of you are troublemakers, unwilling to compromise and see the better in compromise. They blame the participants. But in truth, the reason why America is divided today is not particularly related to the individuals. So let me explain that. What I do with the book is take our three most divided periods in our history. That's just before the Revolution, the 1760s, to the adoption of the Constitution, which was a very bitter process. From Lincoln's election through Reconstruction, an incredibly bitter and divisive process. You can't get more divisive than a civil war, right? And then the last 25 years, which is most politically like our own, the Gilded Age, the last 25 years of the 1800s. And when you work your way through the book, you come to understand that partisanship is an effect more than it is a cause. The cause of partisanship, throughout most of history, the vast majority anyway, is the fact that government is making a decision and imposing it on people. So let me say that again, thank you. Government imposing a decision, because when government's going to decide an issue, it usually has some finality to it, but it also has two sides to it. And it is on virtually any issue. Think of something simple as where to build a road, because some people are in the way of that road and others want to use it, and there you have your two different sides. Take our energy policy. This administration preferred Solyndra. In the past, Republicans perhaps were more interested in fossil fuels. But everything government does, it makes a choice. And as it's making that choice, there are winners and losers. And a third loser, the taxpayer, who has to pay for that. Now, the important thing to understand is that division in politics is normal. You are normal. The media has a skewed view of this, because in fact, in our past, we've been much more divided than today. Politics is actually fairly calm these days compared to our past. But it is different in one critical aspect that I want us to understand. So what do I mean by the fact that politics is calm and our past was more difficult? Well, let me put it this way to you. When we went to adopt the Constitution, most people view it as the greatest governing document in history, and it is. Most people view it as a collaboration that brought a country together, and you can argue that it did, but you must first understand the argument that went on to create that, because it was intense and it was bitter. And our founding fathers, which everyone loves, and they should, or most of us love, weren't always, how shall I say, above board in how they went about this. They were kind of sneaky. For instance, we call them Federalists, right? and those that opposed them were anti-federalists. And nothing could have been further from the truth. Because the anti-federalists believed that government should be limited and within the states, and the federalists actually believed at the time that government needed to be consolidated so the states wouldn't fight. So what did our sneaky founders do? They adopted the language of those against them and claimed to be federalists, and then misbranded those against them as anti-federalists, and went the extra step, see if this sounds familiar, because in politics or in life, what is new is really very old. Our founding fathers often did their best to stop the media from printing opposition papers. Think about that. The news often printed what the Federalists wanted, and the Federalists did their best to stop the anti-Federalist word from being heard. And it was argumentative. Patrick Henry, who was quite responsible for so many things that is America, the man who stood up and said, "Give me liberty, give me death," had thrown up his arms in anger by the time of the adoption of the Constitution. He was so disgusted with politics that he all but left it. The fact that he had 18 kids to feed didn't stop him either. That's a lot of work to do. He was so angry at James Madison, you know, that guy who was the father of our Constitution? Because Madison was in the process of making a backroom deal to get Virginia to accept the Constitution. And the founders had fought the Bill of Rights. They just wanted an all or nothing deal. You take the Constitution as written or not. And Madison was making this backroom wink wink deal. Okay, I'll go for a Bill of Rights. And Patrick Henry was furious at the Constitution because he thought the federal government would swallow up the states. He was right. He was just wrong by a couple of hundred years. And he was so angry at Madison that he said if that man runs for Senate, which was Madison's intent, that there would be rivulets of blood, said Patrick Henry, running through the streets. Now, if you think we're divided and angry today, imagine someone famous on TV saying, if that guy runs for U.S. Senate, there will be rivulets of blood. That's some division. A future president, just to give you a sense, said of the Constitution, it's either this one or the next one will be drawn in blood. Now I ask you, think of an American president or candidate who said you either support my policy or there will be civil war. Now how's that for division, let alone out of the mouth of George Washington? Yes, father of the country, everyone thinks was incredibly steady. But if you understand the nature of politics, because the larger the thing that government is about to do, the more divisive it will be. And so when the North, in effect, wanted the South to live in the United States as the North saw it, there was intense division. And we should expect this. The bigger government, the bigger the project government takes on, the more division. Now what's different today than in the past is in the past, although government did really big things, bigger than what we're doing today in a sense, that it was more divisive. After it was over, partisanship had a chance to recede. So once the Constitution was adopted and there were some that were angry, for most of America, they went home. If you lived in eastern Tennessee, you probably didn't see government. Maybe not in your lifetime. Think about that. You could live without government being involved. And as a result, with the government so small, Thomas Jefferson used to brag about the fact that he was laying off IRS officials, or Treasury officials as it was known then, when he repealed the whiskey tax. When the whiskey tax was imposed by who? George Washington, who fought for freedom of America because of taxes, imposed the first tax, the whiskey tax, which angered some people who made the whiskey, and even those who drank it. Thomas Jefferson used to brag about sending those IRS or Treasury officials home. And government was about 3% of the economy. The difference today, and why I wrote this book, is for people to understand that partisanship cannot or is not afforded the time to recede because government now is everywhere. and it affects you in every way. So the mattress you slept on last night, regulated. The food you ate, the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the way your children are educated, the light you turn off at night. They are agitating you and affecting your life at every minute. And that causes you to get up each day and often be angry at government. And because it is everywhere, and what I mean by everywhere is, Thomas Jefferson talked about a government that was about 3% of the overall nation's economy. Today, it is over 36%. Government is the largest industry in America. And you don't have a chance to be left alone. And as a result, partisanship doesn't go away. Instead, we now have intense competition related to it. And there's 3 competitions I want to talk to you about that's in the book, and then you'll understand why suddenly in January of this year, when I was sitting at my work desk trying to be a small business attorney, and I found out that Barbara Boxer finally was moving on. And I started to receive some phone calls. Are you going to run or not? Love me or not part. You'll understand why I chose to run. 3 competitions. Number 1, our governments, small to large, are spending $6 trillion a year. $6 trillion in an $18 trillion economy. You know what that means, don't you? That means they're writing $6 trillion worth of checks. And it is human nature to want to get those checks. Because if government's handing out money, there's got to be people who show up to do it. And as I said in Lake San Marcos last Monday, you can try this yourself. Do an experiment. Put a sign on your front lawn and say, this Saturday, come tell the best story, winner gets $1,000. Now when your neighborhood finds out that you're starting to give away $1,000, actually people beyond your neighborhood will want to come for that money. And the federal government's not shy about it. They proclaim the fact that they're the largest procurer of goods and services in America. They brag about it, and they teach you online how to get government money. And so people go get it. That is human nature. The fault that we need to come to grips with isn't that the people show up, it's that the government is offering it. Thank you. So, we must understand that life is different now. Because for $6 trillion, Americans are competing with each other, dividing each other to get that money. Solyndra competes with Shell. Delta competes with Boeing. The pensions, part of education, now compete with the teachers. And this is replicated across the country. And so we are literally divided. There's over 18,000 special interest groups in America today, all seeking to influence government in the way they want. Why? Because government is making the decision and they can't be left alone. AT&T is the largest, or pays the most money for lobbying in America. Why? Because they want to? Or the fact that they're regulated in every single thing they do? And so they want to have a say. And if AT&T wants to have a say, then you can expect Verizon's not going to sit at home and watch AT&T and the government decide policy, so Verizon gets off the deck, and Sprint, and T-Mobile, and on and on. But first we must understand the partisan catalyst, which is that government is making the decision. So division number 1 is we're chasing $6 trillion and all the regulations involved. Number 2, people like to give out the $6 trillion. Did you know this? People like to be empowered and give away money. And so we have a competition now to give out the money. And it's exploding. And throughout all of history, the larger government gets, the more it hands out, the more intense the competition. They used to say in ancient Rome, it was understood that the Roman senators would accept certain amounts of money for their favor. Today, we seem shocked by it in America. I don't know why. But how's that competition heating up? In 2012, the average winning senatorial candidate spent $10.2 million. If you think that's a lot, okay, until you realize that as a civilization, we, in 2014, spent over $100 million to decide the Iowa Senate seat alone. Why? Well, they told us the control of the Senate was really important, remember? We spent over $100 million in North Carolina. These are small states. We spent nearly $100 million in Georgia. That is how intense the competition is. As government grows, lobbyists grows, division grows, and so you get even more expensive elections, and you could expect more money in 2016 than ever, because if the Republicans can win, they control 3 branches. For the Democrats, it's incredibly important to block that. And that's where we are. So the 3 things, the competition for the money, division is different today, the competition to give out the money, and the fact that government cannot recede, or will not recede, or is at every corner, agitates you constantly. That is a new historical dynamic in America today, and we need to understand that, especially when you come to realize that more than half of America is reliant or receives some form of government assistance or a check. There are 22 million Americans now working for government. Add on to those who receive a pension. Add on the fact that 1/3 of Americans are on means-tested welfare. Add on Social Security, Medicare. And please don't forget the category that many people forget is the massive number of Americans who sell things to the government or work as contractors. When you add that all up, it's greater than 50%, and you don't need to be a math major to figure out that that puts a lot of pressure on the non-50%. And it also means that we, if we believe in liberating government and prosperity, that we need to have more than the argument of freedom with most people. Because you could go to the head of AT&T, like I say, and say, you know what? There's 18 trillion in debt. That can't go on. He'd agree. But then he'd say, look, I have contracts with the government. Look for ways to elsewhere. And that is where we are with America today and why we're divided. Now, the most divisive government policy in history is why I'm standing before you today. Historically, taxing people is what angers people the most. In fact, we started a whole country, redefined freedom for the ages over the Stamp Act, Patrick Henry again. Does anybody know how much the average transaction under the Stamp Act proposed was going to be? Half a cent, thank you. She read my book. A half a cent. We fought a war over a half a cent. And you, the media, thinks you're unreasonable. Today, we have reached a dangerous point in our civilization's history. We're in what I call the class warfare portion of our history. And that arises throughout history in the same train as massive government, massive regulation, and massive debt. For 40 years, we've had almost unrelenting growth in government. From when Ronald Reagan said that government is not the solution to our problems, government
is the problem.
Government is now 3.5 times larger than that. And if it was a problem then, it is a problem now. And what happens historically is that economies burdened with so many taxes, regulations, and debt, the economy stagnates. This is not science. The more something costs, or it's not difficult science, the more something costs, the less of it you get. It costs more to do business today in America than at any time in our history, so we cannot be surprised that today more businesses fail and go out of business than are started. And you think about that in the continuum, in the rise and fall of a civilization, if more businesses are going under than are started, you know you've gone down a wrong path. And what happens during stagnant economies in politics? Well, I'll tell you what happens. Politicians come along and they have an answer in politics instead of economics. And what they will say is, it's somebody's fault, the rich's fault, and they're taking from the poor. They incite class warfare. Because when the economy stagnates, they point fingers and they want to redivide it. They want to redistribute it. They want to say who has a right to it and who does not. This has never worked in history for the poor. There's no example in history where intense class warfare benefits the society or the poor, because the prescription of that populist is always the very same poison that created the problem in the first place: more government, more redistribution, less incentives, and it goes on and on. So why am I running for U.S. Senate? I'm not running for U.S. Senate because I want to be employed in Washington, I assure you. I really like, crazy as it sounds, to be part of the minority of Americans working to pay taxes. But if we, as a country, are going to continue to do well and be the example of freedom that Washington wanted us to be under his Constitution, then we must restore prosperity front and center to America. Because when the economy grows, people get along better. So let's talk about that. I think, especially in this Senate race in California, and this is a critical Senate race, and I'll tell you why. It's an open seat. We are laboring under Prop 14, which is a top two format. And what that means is only the top two candidates who get votes will be in the final two. When it's an open seat, that encourages a lot of Democrats to run and a lot of things. When it's not an open seat, you can be sure that there will be a Republican in the top two. But in the open seat format, we cannot be sure of that. So the question is, how do we elect someone? How do we get someone in the top two? And I submit to you the answer is not to be someone who runs for office just to say the same thing the Democrats are already saying. Because they can get a Democrat. They're running. They don't vote generic. They don't cross over. The only way the minority party becomes the majority party is to offer a better alternative to whatever is going on now. In other words, we must give voters a choice. It's not enough, as I explained earlier, for us to say they are bad and we are good in these challenging times. To the contrary, we have to offer voters a choice, and a practical one at that. Thank you. So what is the choice we need to give them? Well, if prosperity is a significant issue, and it is, in addition to the foreign policy issue, then we must start to adopt policies that emphasize opportunity over inequality and redistribution. And I am running because I'm going to give that choice, and on day one, I outlined that choice. I'm the only candidate that's running that is actually talking solutions, and definitive ones at that. So choice number one to restore prosperity to America is to get rid of the existing IRS code, to get rid of the IRS as it exists today, and put in a flat tax. Thank you. About 10 days ago now, I want to say, I became the only U.S. Senate candidate in America with an actual flat tax proposal. I'm honored that Stephen Moore, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and Club for Growth, and now of Heritage, is my economic advisor. He toured the state with me. We put together a flat tax, which is at 15.5% on net business income and for individuals, with no tax for a family of 4 except for above $48,000 in income, because that is a choice we can give people. And the flat tax needs to be enacted for 3 reasons. Number 1, it will restore prosperity. We've cut taxes in American history significantly 4 times. All 4 times the economy was in trouble. All 4 times the opposition said it wouldn't help, that it would create a larger deficit and reduce revenues. All 4 times the economy responded. Jobs were created. Less people were on government assistance. There was less division among Americans. And there even was more tax revenues, because when more people are working, more people are paying taxes. If it worked 4 times, and believe me, chapter 8 of the book, the power to tax involves the power to divide, you'll see that it's worked throughout history, and it will again. So, number 1, it will restore the economy. Number 2, we need to defeat class warfare. That is the wrong way to go. The only way to defeat it in history is to create an expanding economy. We need to talk about opportunity, not redistribution, and we can get there. And number 3, we can get rid of or diminish significantly the power of the IRS, and that should be an American goal. Although I do have a suggestion. Those IRS workers who would be losing their jobs, I think we should give them clipboards, send them to the border, welcome the people coming across saying, I'm from the IRS, how can I help you? Power to tax involves the power to destroy, right? The other issue, of course, is water. The government doesn't want you to have the water. I know this because they're pretty open about it. They want 1.5 million less agricultural acres in the Central Valley. They want to restore California to its more nativist state. Their only program is to tax and fine you for using water. I want you to take showers. I'm running for U.S. Senate. And why is that? Because this isn't a drought as much as it is mismanaged water crisis. And you know that 5% is their target of all water use to get you to stop using that. They want you to go from about 14% to about 10%, which is 5% of the overall use through their fining. But did you know that aging municipal pipes throughout this state leak more than 10% of all the water use? We're number 1 in poverty, largely because of a lack of jobs largely related to water. LA County, I believe, $1.6 billion price tag to fix old pipes. Those are actually shovel-ready jobs because it requires a shovel. And even if government was only half effective and replaced half the pipes, that would be more savings than their rationing program. And you know who else has an answer? The lumber industry. Because they have overgrown forests and we're not practicing healthy forest practices. Instead, they're overgrown, leading to tinderbox and danger and death. But you know what? It takes a shovel to thin out the forest. And if we did practice healthy forest practices, what would happen? If you talk to the right people, they can tell you the additional runoff would be enormous. But why isn't this occurring? Because the government's lying to you. They tell you this is an historic drought. It is not an historic drought. In the 800s, a 240-year drought started. This is 4. Which is more historic, 240 or 4? Easy math test. But you know what's not going to happen? People are not going to change their view when it comes to water policies unless we talk to more people. And when I was state party chairman, that was my goal. The LA Times said I was taking the party outside its comfort zone merely because I thought we should talk to more voters. And I had the first in its kind in the country's history at a state party convention, a Latino town hall with me, the ambassador to Uruguay, and Latinos. And it went on Univision, and they won an Emmy. And all we did was talk to people. And you can go to your neighbors and say, did you know when it comes to water? And say, did you know that they want to knock us down 5%, but 10% leaks out of old pipes? And we could fix those with jobs and get people off government assistance. It doesn't have to be a partisan fight. Fixing the water crisis is something that you did every day as mothers. You had a problem, you dealt with it. And you used common sense. And we can do that again. And as I wind up, and I hope you'll ask me some questions as to why I'm running and what some of my other policies are. But I implore you, this is an important moment for the party. My challengers are not talking the issues, and they are mimicking Democrat policies. That will not get us elected. That will not get us in the top 2. But providing voters an actual, clear choice, like voters did in the late 60s to elect James Buckley in New York will, and I hope you enjoy my presentation and will join me in this process. Thank you.